Prabhu clearly highlighted the new strategy of the Gates. Well, they call it a refreshing strategy. The priorities by geographic regions as well as by different commodities. He also highlighted how to implement these strategies as well as the policy component of that strategy. Now we still have like 40 minutes for questions. Who wants to start? Again, let's start from this side. Here's one hand, and then Deborah, your neighbor, and here another one in the middle. Let's probably group 4 or 5 questions together.
Maybe it'll help if they introduce themselves.
Yeah, that's our tradition. We don't need to say that. Yes, please do that. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Imtiaz Bhatti, and I am a student of PhD in Public Policy at the George Washington University. Mr. Pingali, it was a nice presentation, and it covered a lot of areas. And you did mention institutional reform, country policies, and you also mentioned Mr. Chengenpen has also worked on policy areas. My question is that you know that we all know that sustainability of any project depends upon certain institutional presence. For example, institution of property rights. I'm living in a rented apartment. I'm not gonna make any developments or changes in a rented premises. But if I have property rights and I have some title, I can do a lot of things. So there's a lot of research these days that property rights are directly correlated with poverty, hunger, economic growth everywhere.
Oh, okay. Maybe you should really keep your question short. So the property rights.
My question is that I have a hunch that World Bank and other institutions have failed in this area on pressing developing country governments to reform their property rights institution. And you might like not to fall in that trap.
Okay, well, thank you. Deborah.
Hi, Deborah Browdigam, Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI. Thanks for that. It was a great presentation, and I wish we'd all had handouts so we could see all the details on those wonderful theories. My question relates to the theories. You picked a number of countries in Africa to focus on, and other parts of the world as well. And I'm wondering, in terms of your theory of governance and government, how is it that you selected those countries? We know how important it is to have ownership and real government level commitment. Were these the most committed governments that you could find in Africa? Thank you.
Okay. Deborah, could you pass the microphone to your neighbor?
Bob Berg, World Academy of Art and Science. I think Deborah's question rubbed off on me. My question was, you have some middle-income countries on the list, and some donors are adverse to that. Do you think you will be at all leading a trend to re-examine including middle-income countries by donor agencies?
Right. Okay, so there's a question in the middle here. Yes?
Hi, my name is Megan O'Rourke. I'm a AAAS fellow at USDA. My question is about the work with smallholder agriculturalists. Implicit in the development strategy seems to be that eventually there will be a smaller percentage of people who will be farming. And I was wondering if that is the assumption, and how are you considering that and thinking about where these people will go in the economy?
Okay, property rights, governance, and then the transition of smallholders to maybe larger farms, or even move to cities.
Shall I sit here?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Property rights. Now, what we've done in the last couple of years is we've been helping document the current state of property rights across a whole range of countries in sub-Saharan Africa. It's being done through a grant that we've given to WRI and Landesa. And basically, this grant provides a platform by which you can zoom into particular countries and particular locations within country national level and say what's the property right situation in these areas and what are the laws and regulations and the extent to which they're implemented, etc. And that's something that's been particularly useful. But our ability to really influence change at the country level will come very much as we move down to on the ground work in these target countries that we are looking at. And in these countries we need to say what's the extent to which property rights are constraining productivity growth and how do we then handle it. So that's going to be the next level up in terms of active engagement in that area, and we haven't yet got to that point on that. On the governance issue, I think that's a fair comment. We've excluded a lot of countries because of governance issues, that we would not be able to do much, and most other donors haven't been able to do much. Now, the way we chose these countries was much more looking at extent of poverty, the extent to which intensification is happening, the extent to which the returns to productivity improvements will be there, etc. And then to say, what's the government doing today, what's the extent to which the governments in these countries are investing in their agriculture sector, and what's the potential for further enhancing that, etc. And that's how we ended up with this set of countries. One can easily make the argument that you can end up with another set of countries, and I'm sure if all the donors brought together all their countries, there'd be some overlap, but there'd be quite a bit of divergence. But for whatever reasons, one ends up with a list. But governance did come in as a criteria, initially at least, in excluding certain countries, but also in saying that for some of these countries, you're in much better shape than you are in other places. And that brings me also to the middle income country question. I think we struggled with that quite a bit, in fact. And we came out saying certain countries needed to be on our list for several reasons, including India, which we struggled with quite a bit. And the reason for that is you could be in a middle income country status but still have enormously high levels of poverty and high levels of rural poverty. And one needs to figure out, are there international mechanisms, international lessons learned, etc., that helps these lagging regions and move them out of poverty. So that was one area, one reason for doing this. Second, because the capacity in these countries is much greater than in other countries, one can look at ways in which by investing small amounts in some of the middle income countries, you're able to get you're going to get spillover benefits to other countries that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get if you targeted only the least developed in the low-income countries, etc. So there was a whole discussion around that got us there. Smallholders and trends into the future. I mean, this is like a daily discussion that we have in the foundation on where we are with smallholder agriculture, what's the future, when are people going to move off the farms, etc. And I mean, I've been in this business now for 30 years, and some of you have been in this business much longer. When I finished graduate school, and if somebody asked me my vision of where the world would be in 2010, I would have had a vision which would be quite different from where we are today. It seems like we're stuck in some zone there where we're not moving out of. And one would have thought with a certain level of economic growth there would be a lot more transformation out of agriculture, but we haven't seen as much and as rapidly as theory would tell us. And smallholder agriculture continues to be a reality in China, continues to be a reality in East Asia and everywhere else. And it's a challenging topic. It's something that we're really interested to keep thinking about.
Well, thank you, Prabhu. I really appreciate this very sort of tied priorities, a set of countries as well as set of commodities. Now, my question to you is, okay, probably this selection is based on some of the analysis I'm pretty sure you did when I read the document. One thing I was puzzling, maybe it's not so puzzling, is the Gates is not interested in climate change work. One, the other one is among all these animals, hog, pig is missing from your list.
Sorry, I didn't.
The hog, the pigs. Pigs, right. So you have all these animals, chicken, right, beef, cattle. But the pigs are quite important in some of the Southeast Asian countries. Vietnam, Cambodia, well, obviously my own country, China. So I'm wondering why the pig is not there.
Maybe I'll address both those immediately. Climate change. I think, let me make one point clear. The foundation is really committed to climate change work. There's no question about that. We are totally convinced that the ability to succeed in smallholder productivity growth as we look towards 2030, 2040, and 2050 depends a lot on what's happening with climate change and how one can adapt to and mitigate climate change through agriculture. So we're very clear on that. And part of what we're doing through the environmental trade-offs work is also to bring in climate change very explicitly into that. And I should, in my next presentation, make sure I have a slide to show that. But the way we are approaching climate change is, one, what are the adaptation interventions that are necessary? So we're already working on drought, we're already working on submergence tolerance. Should we enhance that work in areas where in the future you're going to see further incidents of drought and submergence, etc.? So that's one way in which we're thinking about it. Second is the whole area of conservation tillage and zero tillage systems, something that we've been very much involved with the work that's going on in South Asia through the CSAP project, etc. And we see zero tillage systems as one mechanism for mitigation that can take place. Mm-hmm. But there's also a whole landscape level changes that will happen through intensification of agriculture, where you may see some of the less productive lands being going back into bush. And that would be another way in which one can see mitigation take place. So there is significant thinking going on around climate change. I guess we're not being smart enough about presenting that. Oh, wait, pigs. One of the reasons pigs didn't make it in the list was primarily many of the target countries we were looking at, that was not a major priority.
All right, let's move to this side. Here, three Davids here. Which David do you want to start? Okay, why don't we start from this David here? Okay.
Thank you, Prabhu. No. Back to scientific technologies. Could you just expand a bit on that, on the adaptation, scientific technologies and drought and nutrition and the focus you're going to see and the promise you see in those technologies and where you expect that to go in the next few years?
Dave Jocelyn with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Prabhu, I noticed the recent grant to Embrapa and the Brazilians to do more work in sub-Saharan Africa. I'd be interested in knowing the rationale behind making that grant. Obviously, the Brazilians are already doing south-to-south activities in this area. It occurs to me that maybe you're thinking about Brazil as an influential G20 member to keep agriculture on the agenda, but I'd appreciate your comments about the rationale behind that grant.
This is David.
David Atwood, USAID. I want to ask the smallholder question in a different way. You had a little circle on one of the slides that said growth in rural economy. Given your strategy, will you be able to, and how will you be able to monitor or assess if you're having success in things that you're not targeting by targeting smallholder farmers. So for example, if the backward and forward linkages, if the income linkages with, non-tradables, rural people selling goods and services to farmers who have somewhat increased incomes, will you be able to track those very positive changes in a rural transformation process to the extent that it is taking place? Thank you.
Right. Okay. The one, yeah.
Doug Faulkner, private consultant. In recent years, there's been growing debate over the so-called food versus fuel controversy, and yet the IEA is projecting much greater global production of biofuels. Seems to me like we need more and greater integration between the energy and agricultural sectors, and yet I only saw one mention up on your slides. I think there was a biofuels project at Stanford. Can you talk a little bit about your thinking of how biofuels or energy enters into all this?
Okay, let's come back to Prabhu. Prabhu?
Okay. First, on the scientific technologies and prospects for that.
And the priorities of science and technology.
Right, the priorities. So a lot of what we're doing today, if you think about our R&D investments and where the priorities are there, I think our top investments is probably on drought today. On the a lot of our high-end investment is going to drought tolerance. That's one big area. Submergence tolerance is the other area, especially for rice. But then there's also a whole set of work on diseases, rust, for example. And a lot of these disease incidents changes also with climate change. And increased incidence of many of these diseases happen. And so those are the big R&D investments that are taking place. Then there is, of course, research looking at potential for yield improvements for the major cereals, etc. But if you look overall, I think today the portfolio has a huge emphasis on stress and management of stress through better technologies. And, part of it is motivated by the existing stress in smallholder agriculture, but part of it is motivated by the way these stress patterns will change with climate change. And so both of these bring those up as top priorities for us.
But also nutrition is a big part of your breeding program.
Nutrition, historically, the biofortification work has been a major part of what we do. And relatively, that's still an important part, but I would suspect it'll be number 5 or what. I don't have the actual rankings, but on top of my head, that's what comes out. The Brazilian partnership, one of the things that came out of our refresh process was an understanding that there are nodes of scientific excellence which are outside our traditional zones of thinking around scientific excellence, right? So there are 2 nodes of, one would say 3 nodes of scientific excellence. Certainly there is China on one side, there's Brazil, and to a much lesser extent, I would say, India. But that's where there's a lot of action taking place. And one of the questions we had was, how do we help capitalize some of that scientific excellence for the cause of smallholder productivity growth? And so we've been having significant engagements with China and significant engagements with Brazil in trying to identify these patterns, figuring out how to capture that knowledge and see how one can help smallholder agriculture in Africa through that excellence. And in this context, the grant that was made to Brazil was very much a small grant, which was to create a mechanism for helping that South-South transfer take place. And so it was just one of those. On the growth linkages issue, well, I'm a true believer in smallholder productivity growth kickstarting the overall growth process. And, once all you have to do is look at what happened in South Asia and Southeast Asia. This was all smallholder-led. Schengen knows that from China. And so anybody who's actually been studying the Asian Green Revolution experience doesn't need to be convinced that smallholder agriculture growth kick-started the overall growth process. And that's what we are convinced about in the foundation. And so I think overall we see the growth linkages fitting in. Now where they may not come together is if the government policy is not appropriately designed in order to have those happen. And so that's where the enabling policy environment issue comes in. And that's something we need to look at.
Could I just add one point here? In fact, IFPRI, the Development Strategy and Governance Division, has been working with the USAID to measure the economy-wide impact of IHA investment in the beginning, not the feed of the future. I think one of the critical problems is lack of the data. You do have the data on investment. You do have the data on macro indicators, but you have a missing middle. I think the living standard measure survey probably will help to really fit in, to find that missing link. I don't know whether we have anybody here from DSGD who can address this question.
So, were you asking something?
Well, I don't think we have anybody here. I think they are having a big conference in Addis Ababa right now,
right.
The African Productivity Conference. Anyway, the biofuel question.
The biofuel question. So we've actually done a grant which was to Stanford and IFPRI to look at the prospects and potential for biofuel. Mark Rosecrant, who's sitting at the back there, can give you a much more nuanced view on that than I will. So, yeah. But we came out of that process saying we are not going to be directly doing grant making for enhancing biofuel production, per se. So that's not going to be one of the options that we'd look at from our work. And then we can have a whole discussion around that.
Let's have another round of questions. Maybe what about here? Oh, Valerie. And probably this part. Valerie, then, Manfred is there. Okay. Valerie, then Manfred?
Hi, Valerie Mueller from IFPRI, DSG representative, but not a CG modeler. So I was just wondering, to what extent does the foundation think about scalability and putting resources towards reforming institutional systems so that the projects are viable on their own once the foundation pulls out? Thanks.
Okay. Manfred.
Thank you. I'm Manfred Zeller from the University of Hohenheim in Germany, and my question is the strategy of Gates Foundation in finding new investment priorities, especially in these focus countries like Tanzania and Ethiopia. You talked about that you would like to investigate value chains. Will you have, for example, scouts or people in the country for the foundation working in these countries and being on the ground? And the second question, very short, what are your plans for the University of Pretoria Policy Hub? Thank you.
There's one behind this. All right, okay, go ahead.
Hello, this is Rachel Trigo from USDA, and I wanted to thank you for your emphasis on data and statistics, and also, as you pointed out at the beginning, the Gates Foundation's focus on sustainability. And I was wondering about what efforts you all are putting into working to move beyond what has often been the practice of donors providing funds for a particular survey or census on an ad hoc basis and moving to institutionalizing that and really encouraging ministries of agriculture to take that on so that surveys and census are sustainably integrated within the ministries of agriculture? Thank you.
Okay, that's probably enough. How to scale up and well, investment priorities in the country instead of Gates not investigating team. I have also observed how do you set your investment priorities there, systematically. Then the data, yes, indeed, I have also observed that. Yeah, we do have lots of pilots and lots of small-scale surveys. How do you actually institutionalize? But for your information, in Ghana, we're really working with the national statistical system to help the Ghanaian system to integrate the agriculture into their household survey. This is not part of your support. I think it's actually quite an interesting experience led by Shashi Kulawani there.
Yeah. I'm actually having dinner with some of the people working on the Ghana survey tonight. So on scalability issues, obviously that's a big issue for us when we look at whether we should be making a grant or making an investment or not. And some of the lessons we've learned from our short history in agriculture grant making is there are certain institutions that one needs to strengthen in order to ensure scale happens. And in the area of R&D, if the CGIAR does not continue to be a strong, viable organization, you will not have a sustainable supply of R&D in agriculture. We're convinced about that. And so that's why we are a core member of the CGIAR system. And we see that as a partnership that's extremely important to us. Similarly, we believe that the Rome food agencies play a really important role in transforming agriculture in developing countries. And it's a role that they need to be playing much more actively in much stronger way than they have in the past. And if there's a way in which one can strengthen the capacity of these agencies and help in the overall reform process that's taking place, then you've got an overall international technical capacity to move that forward. So that's the second area that we're looking at. And the third area we're looking at is how do you then build capacity in the country itself? And that's the third set. And building capacity in the country would mean analytical capacity, but overall capacity to be able to manage and run large-scale transformative process. So in Ethiopia, for instance, we are working with the Prime Minister's office and directly helping them set up an agriculture transformation agency. IFPRI is helping in that along with several other partners. And here, the people who are responsible for this is directly the government of Ethiopia, not any of the other agencies. The government of Ethiopia is calling all the shots. They make the decisions. But then over the long term, their capacity is the one that's changing. And so much of the way we think about scale is in those contexts. What are the broader institutional support that you need to provide in order for this to continue beyond a grant that's made by the foundation? On the country strategies work, Manfred, I think we can go in and we can look at things at a country level and say, here are some of the issues that we think are important. But our starting point is going to be, what's the CADA plan for the country? What did they decide they were going to focus on? Where are their priorities? And how are the broader donor community in the country working along with the government on those priorities? And where are the gaps that we as a private foundation can come into? And so that's the level of conversation we're having right now. So once again, I think Ethiopia is a really good example where the Ethiopian government was the one that identified the need for an overall mechanism for transforming agriculture as an important priority for themselves. and they had an overall strategy of how to do it, and there was a donor group that was working with the government, and we ended up being a part of that and then helping spearhead the overall process for setting up the agency. So it's something we're learning as we go. There are not that many great models out there, but when we see them, we keep looking at them and learning from them. And so next time I come and report back to you, we'll have more to say about this. By the way, I'm giving a seminar at Stuttgart next Friday, so we'll have more to chat about.
Well, actually, I was there yesterday before I came over here. I had a very good dialogue with your team there, ATA, Khalid, Brady, and Greg. So it's lots of exciting things. IFPRI is behind it. We really treat it as an experiment. So we don't know whether it will work. If it works, what lessons we can learn. If it fails, and this is part of the beauty of the Gates Foundation, because they do not have the pressure from the government. You got to make everything work, right? I think for the Gates, they have that sort of room to test, to try, to experiment. So I think Ethiopia is a good example. The government is committed.
Yeah.
Meantime, several donors are committed.
And we can learn from that.
That's right. And a strong analytical support on the ground from IFPRI and the universities.
Yeah. So on the last comment on the institutionalizing of statistics. First, most of the data grants that we've given are long-term data grants, which cover the first grant to the LSMS work from the World Bank was for 6 years, and it covers 25,000 households in a panel. Similarly, the grant we've given to FAO to help in their country statistics work was another 6-year grant, which FAO matched with their own core money associated with that. Now, what we are hoping is, as we go through these grants, the institutions themselves start putting more and more money into this. And you're already beginning to see the World Bank talking more and more about the importance of data and statistics, and the way LSMS is a useful tool for them, etc. So we're hoping that this will create a new emphasis for data among these agencies. Last week there was a meeting in Rome which brought together several donors and countries to talk about strengthening national agriculture statistics. And that's then resulting in an overall plan of action for strengthening national agriculture statistics. And much of that work will be done through the governments themselves and through their budgetary processes themselves. And many of the donor support will be more topping up rather than the core support needed for doing this. So there's a whole group of us who've been really, really concerned about long-term sustainability of data and statistics work. And this is something that we are trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward. If we ever get proposals, which we do quite often, for doing one-shot surveys, we've generally not been supportive of that. We'd like to look at data work as part of a bigger picture activity at the country level rather than a one-off activity for us.
Well, we have time for another round of questions. Is it Tim there? No, it's not Tim, sorry. Okay, two in the back row there.
Nancy Harris from JSI. You mentioned the gap between increasing agricultural productivity and nutritional status, particularly young children, pregnant women. What specifically do you intend to do, and will you do joint granting with your health division?
Yeah, well, what is it, GIS? GSI? JSI. JSI.
John Snow.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yes, there's one back in that corner, yes. There you go.
Hi, I'm Russell Brott with FinTrack. And the question relates to transparency, specifically in the case of Ethiopia. What concern does Gates have, if at all, about the transparency of decisions, for instance, by the Prime Minister's office to set up the Ag Transformation Agency, which, to the best of my knowledge, was really a closed-door decision, and the analysis behind it, which hasn't yet been released to the public?
Okay. So one there, okay. Maybe we start from the lady there in the back. In green? Right, in green.
Thank you. My name is Leanne Sadowski with the Aga Khan Foundation, and I was just wondering if you could go into greater detail about, being a smallholder farmer is actually quite a large segment of the population, and I was just wondering if there's any further thinking that the Gates Foundation has done on the population within smallholder farmers, the chronically food insecure, the vulnerable, the near poor, et cetera. Thank you.
Okay. The gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is Mungra. I'm the ambassador of Republic of Suriname to the USA. I think one major obstacle to smallholder farmers is the fact that they lack the capacity to market their own products and dry stocking, because they don't own the big storehouses. So as a consequence of which, most of the time they depend on the consortium or a monopoly or oligopoly of the big farmers, which will finance them in advance at a lower rate. So this dependency, unless you can get rid of it, it makes that, and let alone to speak about access to export market, that they are still heavily dependent on these middlemen who own the storage and the distribution system and so on. How did you tackle that problem? Thank you.
Okay, the one in the front row. Any other quick question from this side?
Hi, Martin Weber from J.E. Austin Associates. I'd like to just add an element to Russell's question about Ethiopia. In terms of sustainability of effort, one would anticipate that budgets aren't going to be there, the quality of collection of data is not going to be there if the data isn't being used. And I'd like to know how you looked at that question when you began to support Ethiopia's system.
Okay.
For statistics.
For statistics.
I think we have some questions from, online? Then Raju, did you have a question, or you just wanted to alert me? Okay. Why don't you, okay, go ahead. While you are having the microphone, why don't you use that as an advantage?
My name is Dito Isiabo from the State Department. I'm a Jefferson Science Fellow. Thank you for the wonderful presentation indeed. My question is regarding implementation of the Noble grant that you've proposed here, and people have referenced that in the past. I was literally very pleased with the bottoms-up approach that you stressed in your presentation. I'd like you to expatiate a little bit about what you mean by bottoms-up. As you know, lack of infrastructure in these rural areas is a major setback, and making grants to institutions or big agencies may not actually solve that problem. So I'm wondering what you hope to do to allow or enable these countries to develop infrastructure in the rural areas. Thank you.
All right. Simon?
This question is from Duncan at the University of Michigan State University.
All right. Duncan.
He says, thanks for a very informative presentation. You talked about the importance of the collaborative masters in ag, econ, and policy. Do you have plans to support a similar effort for West African countries?
All right, yes. Okay, so these questions are very diverse, very complex, so probably you can pick up the one you wanted to answer. Last round, you can choose and pick.
Actually, I'm now forgetting which one was, what were the issues, because I've been writing quite fast. Could you remind me on the nutrition grant making from JSI, what was the question?
Nutrition. Yeah, go ahead.
strategy to address.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
And then will you do
connection
joint?
with, yeah. So, yes, the good news is the nutrition work in health and ag is now much, much better connected than it was even a couple of years ago. And as we look to the future, it'll be even more closely connected. So there's a lot of really exciting future now where we look at delivery systems, along with looking at everything to do from biofortification work to understanding the policy interventions that need to take place for improving diet diversity, etc. So we're now looking at one streamlined approach across the foundation around nutrition, and that's going to be quite a big step forward for us. So I think the nutrition area is one where you want to watch some change happening. On the transparency issue, ultimately, the foundation is a grant-making body, and we work with partners who are on the ground. So if you think about the way the ATA was set up, the ATA was set up as a direct request from the government of Ethiopia, which went to the entire donor community in Ethiopia. The donor group in Ethiopia spent a lot of time addressing this and talking about it and discussing it with the various groups within the government.
I want to add to some point. In fact, before that, the Gates commissioned a couple of studies together with the government. Because, well, I think it's a directly to address some of the demand from smallholders. So, for example, we do have, and this from our country strategy support program there, we consult with stakeholders from farmers organizations, from the government, from even development agencies there. As I remember, we have several researchers who have been involved in that process in doing some diagnosis about the challenges problem there. And that consultation is pretty wide, and it involves farmers organizations there.
So moving along to the further delineation of smallholder agriculture. Because that's something that was quite challenging for us, because one can say anybody under $1.25 a day rural household is a smallholder household if they're cultivating land, etc. But we very quickly ran into the question of poor versus ultra poor, and whether the ultra poor have access to land and resources and livestock, etc. And so right now we're quite comfortable in the zone of saying smallholder but not ultra poor, that we can target much of our work against. But that doesn't mean we don't think about the ultra poor. What we're now trying to do is to say, what do we do with the ultra poor? If you think about Africa versus Asia, in the case of Asia, the ultra poor access to land is very limited. But in the case of Africa, it's a much more nuanced issue. And so we're now trying to examine that. And somebody who used to be in this building is leading our efforts in that area. It's Joachim von Braun and Zeph are leading a major effort right now for us to stratify smallholder agriculture relative to poor and ultra poor, and then say what are the various interventions needed for both groups. So as that process evolves, we'll have more information coming out of that. On the marketing side, I totally accept the point, and it comes back to the infrastructure issues. Because if you don't have solid infrastructure, you're always going to run into this problem. And, again, as a private foundation, one cannot say, okay, we'll invest in infrastructure, we'll invest in roads, transport, and all of that. But one can say that in areas where there is those investments taking place, we can complement that through other investments for productivity improvement. And that part of that was related to the country choice that was taking place. But I think there's a lot that one can do on on-farm storage. On-farm storage, by improving on-farm storage, you can actually cut much of the production, post-production losses and transport that are taking place. And that's something that we are looking at quite a lot. Small interventions, small-scale interventions around on-farm storage. On the data systems and who does the analysis, that's a really important question. And one of the reasons we are interested in things like the Collaborative Masters program is to improve the supply of analysts. And also we've invested in the policy hubs within about a dozen countries in Africa, where we're creating policy think tanks within the countries, which then address what are the real pressing problems that need analysis, and bringing together the analysis. So again, that's creating a demand for further analysis in the country. But as I said earlier, the demand for analysis is huge. The supply of analysis is where we are really struggling, and that's a long-term proposition, and we keep working on that. Related to this is the question of whether we are doing a collaborative masters in West Africa. There is some very intense discussion going on, is what I can say. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, well, we still have 2 or 3 minutes. Well, I read the Gates strategy on agriculture rural development. I really like it. It has a clear priority based on solid analysis and also consultation. Several rounds of consultation really provided critical inputs into that. So the priority focusing on R&D is very important, but it provides public goods, international public goods. So majority of the agricultural funding goes to R&D investment. I think this is very critical. The data and the policy, yes, data. Data is a public good by itself. So how can we make sure that we can really help the country to set up their own data system, make sure that the data should also be shared with public. I think Gates is also pushing for that. Gates Foundation is pushing the public goods nature of the data set. And however, Prabhu, as I read this, by the way, this process, this strategy development process also provides a very useful insights for us. IFPRI now is in the very beginning stage of developing our own strategy or refreshing our new strategy. So we do have an old strategy. We wanted to revamping our old strategy because the global landscape has changed, the stakeholders have changed, the funding landscape has also changed. So the Gates strategy provides very good insights into our own strategy. Well, IFPRI also appreciates the partnership with Gates. We have really moved towards a new way of partnership. I remember we used to have very small ad hoc project, right? So now we move towards larger, multi-year, multi-donor, multi-million dollars. It's a large scale support. I really like that. So very strategic, focusing on long-term international public goods. So let's continue to do that. So I do have 3 or 4 reflections on your new strategy. The one is the strategy has not emphasized the experiments. The Gates is very different from government donors. So the foundation can afford to do some experiments, can learn from the experiments, can learn from success, can also learn from failures. So piloting, experimenting, I think this is Gates' strength, so they can do it. The second is South-to-South learning. Again, the donors supported by governments have their political agenda. It is rather difficult for them to work together. The trust sometimes is a problem. But Gates does not have that problem. So non-political, non-government, and can bring different stakeholders from South and North together. So I think we should really push Gates to do more on that. So Brazil, China, India from the South, then Africa from the south is south-south learning is another way Gates could try to expand more. The third one is actually policy-making process. We have discussed about the data for them, training the master degree students. But one thing we're still struggling is the whole policy-making process. So how can we understand that? How can we really push for a more transparent or more timely process that can really lead to good outcome? Indeed, in the past, we have not good analysis, good policies, but they have not moved to the final implementation and to final outcome or results. Then capacity building. Gates is already doing that. I just cannot overemphasize the importance of capacity, particularly capacity in policy making, policy analysis. I really hope in the next 5 to 10 years, most of the policies in Africa will come from African policy analysts, not from IFPRI, not from Washington-based think tanks, not from Europe, or not from land-grant universities. They should really come from analysts based in Africa, either their universities, their government research agencies, or even the private think tanks. So for that, Prabhu, we really thank you. Thank you for this great opportunity we can interact with you. Let's give Prabhu a great, great round of applause.